The fluorescent lights of Naval Medical Center San Diego's main cafeteria cast everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even fresh food look tired. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood in the lunch line, tray in hand, watching the server portion out something that might have been chicken parmesan in a former life. The smell of disinfectant competed with whatever the kitchen was calling today's special, and won. She shifted her weight, feeling the familiar ache radiate up from her left femur. The titanium rod didn't hurt exactly, not anymore, but her body remembered the weight it carried differently now. Every step was a negotiation. Behind her, someone's pager went off. Ahead, two nurses debated the merits of the salad bar versus the hot line. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The kind of ambient noise that meant no one was dying. No alarms were screaming. No incoming wounded were being rushed through doors that wouldn't close fast enough. Sarah paid for her lunch and turned toward the seating area. The cafeteria sprawled before her in its usual configuration. Attending physicians claimed the tables near the windows, nurses clustered in the middle section, and the residents, young, hungry, still convinced they knew everything, occupied the corner near the vending machines. She'd learned the geography months ago when she'd transferred here from Walter Reed. Learned it and learned where she fit in it, which was mostly nowhere specific. She started across the room. Her left leg dragged slightly, the limp more pronounced when she was tired. Today she was tired. 3 back-to-back shifts in the orthopedic wing, each one bleeding into the next, each one requiring her to stand longer than the physical therapist recommended. At the residence table, one of them glanced up. A kid who couldn't be more than 26, with the kind of clean hands that had never set a bone in a field hospital. He said something to his companion. Both of them looked at her. The second one, a woman with her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, pressed her lips together in what might have been sympathy, or might have been something else entirely. The first resident's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. Something in between that landed worse than either. Sarah kept walking. She'd developed a policy about this. See it, catalog it, file it away, keep moving. Stopping to address every look, every whisper, every assumption about what her limp meant about her capability would require more energy than she had to spare. The rod in her leg was permanent. The opinions of people who'd never treated a sucking chest wound under mortar were temporary. She found a table near the back, away from the windows, away from the clusters of conversation. Set her tray down, pulled out the chair, sat with the careful deliberation of someone who knew exactly how much the getting back up would cost. Her chicken parmesan looked up at her with congealed cheese and a side of vegetables that had been steamed into submission. She picked up her fork. The cafeteria hummed around her. Someone laughed too loud at a joke she couldn't hear. A phone buzzed. Trays clattered in the dish return. The attending physicians were discussing a surgical case, their voices carrying that particular confidence that came from being right more often than not. Sarah cut into her chicken. The knife required more pressure than it should have. She was halfway through her first bite when the room changed. Not the sound stayed the same. But something in the quality of the air shifted, the way it does when someone important enters a space and everyone's awareness pivots without anyone saying a word. Sarah looked up. The memory always came back in fragments, never the whole thing at once, never clean. Sarah sat in her apartment that evening, the encounter with Captain Webb still replaying in her mind. She'd managed to hold herself together in the cafeteria, through the apologies and the questions and the sudden attention from people who'd looked through her for months. But now, alone, her hands trembled as she unbuckled the brace she still wore on particularly long days. The titanium rod didn't hurt anymore, not physically. The surgeons at Landstuhl had done exceptional work. Then the team at Bethesda had refined it. She had full range of motion, could stand through a 12-hour shift if she paced herself. The limp was permanent. Something about the way the bone had shattered, the angle of the reconstruction. But she'd learned to move with it rather than against it. It was the other scars that still ached. She pulled up the photo on her phone, the one she looked at maybe twice a year when she needed to remember why she made the choices she had. Her field hospital team, taken 3 days before the attack. 12 faces, all of them younger than they had any right to be, standing in front of a tent that smelled like antiseptic and desert dust, and fear poorly masked by dark humor. 4 of them hadn't made it home. The IED had hit during a mass casualty push. 17 wounded from a convoy ambush, all of them critical, all of them bleeding out faster than her team could work. She'd been elbow deep in a thoracotomy when the first blast took out the generator. Emergency lights kicked in. Someone shouted about incoming. The protocol was clear. Evacuate to the hardened bunker, get the patients who could move, leave the rest for the next team. She'd looked down at the Marine on her table. 19 years old, maybe 20. Sucking chest wound, collapsed lung, pressure dropping. 5 more minutes and she could stabilize him enough for transport. She'd kept working. Corporal Rodriguez had been on the table next to hers, the one her colleague had abandoned when the evacuation order came. Massive arterial bleed in his leg, already shocky, maybe 3 minutes from bleeding out completely. Sarah had made a choice. She'd grabbed the clamps, crossed to his table, and done what needed doing while the building shook and dust rained from the ceiling, and someone screamed at her to move. She'd gotten the artery clamped, started the transfusion, looked up to see her own patient seizing. No one at his table. The second blast hit before she could get back to him. She remembered the ceiling coming down in slow motion, remembered throwing herself over Rodriguez, her body making the decision before her brain caught up. Remembered the weight of concrete and rebar, the sound of her femur snapping, the taste of blood and dust. Remembered waking up 3 days later in Germany and learning that the 19-year-old Marine with the chest wound had died on the table while she'd been saving someone else. Sarah set her phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. Captain Webb had thanked her for Rodriguez, had told her about the daughter, the graduation, the 6 extra years. He'd meant it as comfort, as recognition. And it was, God, it was. Knowing Rodriguez was alive, that her choice had mattered, that someone's father had made it home. But no one ever mentioned the other names. The ones who died while she was making impossible calculations about who had the better chance, who could wait, who couldn't. That was the scar that didn't show, the one that made her limp through the cafeteria with her head down, avoiding eye contact, because meeting someone's eyes meant they might ask questions she didn't know how to answer. Some battles you won, some you lost, and some you survived without ever being sure which category they belonged to. The cafeteria had settled back into its usual rhythm when the double doors opened again. This time, the change in atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. Captain Marcus Webb entered with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself. It simply was. He wore his service khakis with the casual precision of someone who'd stopped thinking about uniforms decades ago, the trident on his chest catching the fluorescent light. His face carried the particular weathering that came from years in places the Navy didn't advertise, and his eyes moved across the room with an assessment that was both automatic and complete. Conversations didn't stop so much as they softened, voices dropping half a register. The young residents at the corner table straightened slightly in their chairs. Even Dr. Patterson, mid-sentence in a story about his golf game, let his words trail off. Webb's scan of the cafeteria was methodical. He took in the layout, the exits, the clusters of personnel. Then his gaze found Sarah, still sitting alone at her table near the window, her tray mostly untouched. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition, but something close to it. The kind of look one combat veteran gives another across a crowded room. An acknowledgement that existed outside of rank or circumstance. He moved toward her table with the economical gait of someone who'd learned to cover ground efficiently. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Sarah was looking down at her food, pushing rice around her plate with her fork, when his shadow fell across her table. She glanced up and for a moment her training kicked in. the automatic assessment of rank, the mental preparation to stand despite the pain it would cost her. But Webb was already coming to attention. The movement was so precise, so formal, that it seemed to pull the oxygen out of the room. His spine straightened, his chin leveled, his hands aligned perfectly at his sides. Then, with the kind of deliberation usually reserved for funeral details and medal ceremonies, he brought his hand up in a salute, not the casual greeting exchanged in hallways, not the perfunctory acknowledgement between officers. This was the salute rendered to someone who'd earned it in ways that couldn't be written in fitness reports or captured in commendations. Sarah's fork clattered against her tray. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the linoleum, and forced herself to stand. Her left leg trembled with the effort, the muscles around the titanium rod protesting. But she came to attention as best she could and returned the salute, her hand steady even as her leg was not. The cafeteria had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work, standing motionless behind the serving line. Webb held the salute for 3 full seconds, an eternity in that frozen moment. Then he dropped his hand and extended it toward her. "Lieutenant Chen." His voice carried across the room without being loud. It had the quality of someone who'd given orders in firefights and knew exactly how to make himself heard. "I served with Corporal Rodriguez. You gave him 6 more years with his daughter. He made it to her high school graduation last month." Sarah took his hand. Her grip was firm, despite the tremor running through her body. Whether from the effort of standing or from something else entirely, it was impossible to say. "Thank you for your service," Webb continued, his eyes holding hers, "and your sacrifice." They stood there, hands clasped, 2 people who'd seen things that most of the room couldn't imagine and wouldn't want to. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning that didn't need to be spoken. Then Webb released her hand, gave a single nod, and turned away. But he didn't head for the exit. The cafeteria had that particular quality of silence that follows a detonation. Not empty, but ringing with absence. Every conversation had been severed mid-word. Forks rested against plates. Someone's chair scraped as they turned for a better view. Captain Marcus Webb stood at attention before Sarah's table, his right hand raised in salute. Sarah's fork clattered against her tray. Her body responded before her mind caught up, years of training overriding the shock. She pushed herself upright, her left leg screaming in protest as she locked it straight. Her own hand snapped to her temple, returning the salute with the precision drilled into her at Annapolis. The captain's face was weathered in the specific way of men who'd spent years in desert sun and salt spray. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. The salute wasn't perfunctory. He held it the way you hold a salute at a funeral, at a change of command, at moments when the gesture carries weight beyond protocol. "Lieutenant Chen." His voice wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the space. "I served with Corporal Rodriguez." Sarah's breath caught. Rodriguez. She saw him immediately. 22 years old, both legs mangled below the knee, bleeding out on a stretcher while the compound shook with secondary explosions. She tied the tourniquets herself, her hands steady even as the walls cracked above them. "You gave him 6 more years with his daughter." 6 years. Sarah had never known if he'd made it past the first night. They'd loaded him onto the last helicopter out, and then the ceiling had come down. And after that, there'd been only pain and darkness and the long road back to something resembling function. "He made it to her high school graduation last month." The captain's words landed like physical objects. Rodriguez had a daughter who'd graduated high school, who'd had her father there to see it. Sarah's vision blurred at the edges. "Thank you for your service and your sacrifice." Captain Webb held the salute for 3 more seconds. She counted them, each one an eternity. Before dropping his hand, he extended it toward her instead, and she took it. His grip was firm, brief, the handshake of one service member to another. He released her hand and stepped back. Sarah remained standing, her leg trembling now with the effort of keeping weight on it. She watched him turn and walk toward the exit. Then he stopped. The resident's table sat directly in his path. The four of them had gone very still, their faces varying shades of pale. The one who'd made the comment about desk duty looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Captain Webb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That woman has more courage in her injured leg than most people have in their entire body. Each word was distinct, separated by just enough space to let it settle. She earned that limp saving lives under fire. The resident who'd smirked was staring at his hands now, his jaw clenched tight. Remember that the next time you're tempted to judge someone's worth by how they walk. The captain didn't wait for a response. He continued to the exit, his footsteps the only sound in the cafeteria. The door closed behind him with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Sarah lowered herself back into her chair, her leg finally giving out. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady them, trying to process what had just happened. Rodriguez had made it, had lived, had walked his daughter down the aisle or watched her accept her diploma, or whatever fathers did at graduations. The tourniquets had held, the helicopter had made it. 6 more years. Around her, the cafeteria remained frozen, everyone still processing what they'd witnessed. Then someone started moving toward her table. The afternoon sun slanted through the cafeteria windows as Sarah finished her coffee. Most of the lunch crowd had dispersed, leaving only scattered groups at distant tables. She was gathering her tray when a man approached. Mid-30s, athletic build, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. Lieutenant Chen. She looked up. His face was unfamiliar, but something in his eyes suggested recognition. "I'm Miguel Rodriguez." He paused, as if the name should mean something. When she didn't immediately respond, he continued. "Kandahar, September 2019. You pulled me out of the field hospital before the second blast." Sarah's breath caught. She remembered hands, so many hands, grabbing uniforms, dragging weight, the copper taste of dust and blood. She remembered faces twisted in pain, but the chaos had blurred individual features into a desperate collage of survival. "I was unconscious for most of it," Miguel said. "Shrapnel had torn through my abdomen. The doctors told me later that I'd have bled out in another 3 minutes." He shifted his weight, and she noticed the slight hesitation in his movement, the ghost of an injury that mirrored her own. "You got me to the evac zone, stayed with me until the bird arrived, even though the whole compound was coming down." Sarah's hand tightened on her tray. She'd filed the official reports, attended the debriefings, received the commendations. But the faces of the men she'd saved had remained abstract, names on casualty lists marked "survived" instead of the alternative. "Captain Webb said you made it to your daughter's graduation." Miguel's face transformed. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Sophia, she's 18 now. Full ride to UC San Diego. Pre-med, actually." He turned the phone towards Sarah. A young woman in a blue graduation gown beamed at the camera, one arm around Miguel's shoulders. "She wants to be a trauma surgeon." Sarah studied the photo. The girl had her father's eyes, bright with intelligence and determination. "She knows what you did," Miguel said quietly. "I've told her the story, about how some people run toward danger when everyone else is running away. About how courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it." He pocketed his phone. "She's applying to the Navy's medical scholarship program. Says if she's going to save lives, she wants to do it where it matters most." Something loosened in Sarah's chest. A knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for 4 years. The nightmares still came sometimes. The screaming, the smoke, the terrible mathematics of triage. But here was the equation balanced. Here was proof that the pain had purchased something real. "I work at the VA hospital now," Miguel continued. "Physical therapy, helping guys like me learn to walk again, learn to live with what we brought home." He glanced at her leg. "Captain Webb told me about the rod. 3 surgeries. 4, Sarah corrected. They're talking about a fifth. Does it ever stop hurting? She considered lying, offering the comfortable platitude. Instead, she gave him the truth. No, but you learn to carry it differently. The pain becomes part of the story, instead of the whole story. Miguel nodded slowly, understanding passing between them, without need for further words. Sophia wants to meet you, if you'd be willing. She has questions about field medicine, about serving, about... He stopped. About what it costs. Sarah thought of the young resident's smirk, the whispers, the isolation of carrying invisible wounds through a world that only saw the limp. Then she thought of a girl choosing to run toward danger, inspired by a story of strangers saving strangers in the worst moments imaginable. I'd like that, she said. Tell her to call me. The young resident's name was Dr. Kevin Marsh, and he couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing the moment replayed in his mind. His smirk, the whispered comment to his colleague about fitness standards, the way Lieutenant Chen had simply collected her tray and moved on as if she'd heard it all before. Because she had. That was the part that made his stomach turn. He arrived at the hospital before dawn, earlier than his shift required. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to night staff finishing their rotations. He sat in his vehicle for 20 minutes, rehearsing what he wanted to say, then discarding every version as inadequate. The cafeteria was quiet at this hour. A handful of nurses grabbed coffee between rounds. Maintenance staff mopped the floors. And there, at the same corner table she'd occupied yesterday, sat Lieutenant Chen with a medical journal and a cup of tea. Kevin approached slowly, suddenly aware of how his footsteps echoed in the mostly empty space. She looked up as he neared, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. Lieutenant Chen. His voice came out rougher than intended. May I sit? She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat, then immediately stood again. I need to say this properly. Yesterday I judged you based on something I didn't understand. I made assumptions about your capabilities, your dedication, your worth as a medical professional. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. Sarah set down her journal. You apologized yesterday. That was shock talking. This is me talking. He remained standing. I went home and looked up the Kandahar Field Hospital attack. I read the after-action reports that are publicly available. I saw the commendations, the witness statements, the casualty counts that would have been higher if you hadn't stayed. Dr. Marsh. I'm a third-year resident, he continued. I've never treated a patient under fire. I've never had to make life or death decisions while the building was collapsing around me. The hardest thing I've faced is a difficult attending physician and a few all-night shifts. He finally met her eyes. I have no right to judge how you walk when I've never had to run toward danger instead of away from it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Sit down, doctor. He sat. You made a mistake, she said. A common one. You saw something different and made it small in your mind so you could feel bigger. We all do it. The question is what you do after. I want to do better. Then do better. She pushed her journal toward him. It was open to an article about treating traumatic injuries in resource-limited environments. This is what I'm working on now. Training protocols for field medics operating in combat zones. I could use a research assistant who understands emergency medicine and isn't afraid to ask hard questions. Kevin stared at the journal, then at her. You'd want me to work with you after yesterday? You came back. You thought about it. You're here before sunrise trying to make it right. Sarah's expression softened slightly. That tells me more about your character than a stupid comment made in ignorance. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is whether we learn from them. She stood, gathering her things. The limp was pronounced as always, each step a visible reminder of what she'd endured. The real lesson isn't about respecting veterans or visible injuries, she said. It's about recognizing that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Treat people with dignity first. Ask questions second. Judge never. Kevin watched her walk away, the journal still open on the table in front of him. He pulled it closer and began to read. The silence held for 3 heartbeats after Captain Webb left. Then chairs scraped against linoleum. Sarah watched them come. First, the older nurse from oncology, the one who'd nodded at her in passing, but never spoken. She placed her hand briefly on Sarah's shoulder, squeezed once, and moved on without words. Then, a physician assistant Sarah recognized from the orthopedic wing, who simply said, "Thank you, Ma'am," before returning to his table. The young resident approached last. Dr. Kevin Morrison. His badge read. Up close, he looked younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 28, fresh enough that his white coat still had crisp creases. His face had gone from flushed to pale. Lieutenant Chen. He stopped a respectful distance from her table. "I owe you an apology. What I said, what I implied, there's no excuse for it." Sarah studied him. She'd seen that expression before, on the faces of young Marines who'd made their first serious mistake in the field. Shame mixed with the desperate hope for redemption. "Sit down, Doctor." He did, perching on the edge of the chair like he might need to evacuate quickly. "What did you say exactly?" Sarah asked. "I didn't actually hear it." Morrison's jaw worked. I made a comment about fitness standards. Suggested you should be on desk duty." He met her eyes. "I judged you based on how you walk. I'm supposed to be better than that." "You're supposed to be human," Sarah said. "Humans make assumptions. The question is what you do after." She picked up her fork, speared a piece of chicken. Morrison watched her, uncertain whether he'd been dismissed. "I had a corpsman once," Sarah continued. "Kid from Ohio named Peters. Brilliant medic, but he had this stutter. Got worse under stress. Some of the Marines gave him hell for it at first." She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "Then we took contact during a patrol. Peters ran through gunfire to reach a wounded lance corporal, talking the whole time, steady as a rock, not a single stutter. Walked him through staying conscious until we could get him out." Morrison leaned forward slightly. Turned out the stutter was from a childhood head injury. His brain had rewired itself, but under normal circumstances, the pathway glitched. Under extreme stress, different neural pathways activated. He was actually more articulate when people were dying. Sarah set down her fork. The Marines who'd mocked him, they apologized, and they never made assumptions about anyone again. Did he make it back?" "He did. Last I heard, he's a PA in Baltimore." Sarah tilted her head. "The lance corporal he saved is a high school teacher in Nevada. Has 3 kids." Morrison nodded slowly. "Corporal Rodriguez, the one Captain Webb mentioned. Sucking chest wound and a severed femoral artery. I had about 4 minutes to stabilize him before he bled out." The memory flickered behind her eyes. The copper smell of blood. The sound of Rodriguez whispering his daughter's name. "The IED hit while I was clamping the artery. Couldn't leave him. The second blast, that's when you were injured." "That's when the ceiling fell, yes." Sarah picked up her fork again. "Rodriguez lived. I limp. Seems like a fair trade." Morrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "I'm going to be better. Not just at not judging. At seeing people." "Good," Sarah met his eyes. "Because in about 5 years, you're going to be the attending physician someone looks up to, and the residents under you will learn from everything you do, not just what you teach." He stood, nodded once with something approaching a salute, and walked back to his table. Sarah watched him sit down and say something to his colleagues. 2 of them glanced her way, then looked down at their trays. The cafeteria's normal rhythm gradually resumed, but the quality of the sound had changed. People spoke more quietly, moved more carefully, as if the room itself had learned something. The cafeteria had returned to its normal rhythm by the time Sarah finished her meal, but something fundamental had shifted. She carried her tray to the disposal area, aware that eyes still followed her, though the quality of those glances had changed. No longer assessment, now recognition. She stepped outside into the San Diego afternoon, the sun warm against her face. The parking lot stretched before her, heat shimmering off the asphalt. Her leg ached. It always did after standing that long. But the pain had become such a constant companion, she barely registered it anymore. What she did register was the weight she'd been carrying since Kandahar finally feeling lighter. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Lieutenant Chen, Captain Webb passed along your contact. This is Maria Rodriguez. My dad talks about you every single day. Thank you for giving me more time with him. If you're ever in Phoenix, please visit us. Sarah read it twice, then saved the number. She thought about Corporal Rodriguez as she'd last seen him. Unconscious, bleeding out on that hospital floor, while the walls came down around them. She'd been so certain he wouldn't make it. The fact that he'd walked his daughter down the aisle at graduation, made every surgery, every painful rehabilitation session, every whispered comment in every cafeteria worth it. She slid into her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield she could see the hospital's main entrance. Doctors and nurses moved in and out, each carrying their own invisible burdens. The surgeon who'd lost a patient last week, the nurse whose marriage was falling apart, the resident drowning in student debt and imposter syndrome, everyone fighting battles no one else could see. Sarah had spent 2 years angry about her injury, furious at what had been taken from her. She'd been a trauma surgeon, her hands steady, her mind sharp under pressure. Now those same hands trembled during long procedures, and she'd been reassigned to consultation and teaching roles. Desk duty, as some called it. She thought of it as a demotion, an end to the work that defined her. But today, watching those young residents approach her table one by one, seeing the shift in their understanding, she'd felt something she hadn't experienced since before the blast. Purpose. The stories we carry matter. The scars we bear teach lessons that can't be found in textbooks. Her phone buzzed again. Dr. Patel. Sarah, would you be willing to speak to the incoming residents next month? About battlefield medicine and trauma response. I think they need to hear from you. She typed her response. Yes. One word. But it felt like opening a door she'd thought was permanently closed. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The titanium rod in her femur would always be there. The limp would never fully disappear. Some mornings she'd still wake up back in Kandahar, the smell of blood and burning metal filling her lungs. But those weren't weaknesses. They were evidence. Evidence that she'd been there. That she'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. That some things matter more than personal safety, or career advancement, or walking without pain. As she merged onto the highway, Sarah caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 2 years, she recognized the woman looking back at her. Not the surgeon she'd been, not the patient she'd become. Someone new. Someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. Who carried her scars openly. Who understood that the invisible battles we all carry are what make us human. And that sharing those battles might be the most important service of all.